Welcome back to Just Talking. We have a great show for you today because we have a great guest for us to talk to, and that is Dr. Annette Bochenek, a film historian. Dr. Bochenek, thank you so much for talking with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. My pleasure to be here.
Well, for those who don't know about film historians, what does a film historian do?
Yeah, basically with film historianship, rather, you do a lot of research into, for me, it's classic film, documenting and of course viewing these great films of the past, learning really about all the on-screen and off-screen talents that were responsible for creating these final products, and really documenting their legacy today, and kind of going backwards to looking at what's been written about them, what production for this film was like, why it was inspired, etc. So that's a look into being a film historian.
Well, what made you choose to be a film historian?
Yeah, so it's one of the greatest passions I have is really in relation to classic film or classic cinema. And essentially, when I talk about that period, it's also frequently referred to as the golden age of Hollywood. And to put sort of some years to associate with that, it really stems from about the silent era for movie making. So something as early as the 1910s, for example, and that early transition to sound, all the way up until about 1960, I'd say. So that's primarily where my interests lie. And it's something that really came about out of this passion I have for film and that particular period for filmmaking.
Well, let's delve into, you got a great website and blog of this Hometowns to Hollywood. So those who haven't been on it, let's talk about it. How did this Hometowns to Hollywood come about and what is it?
Yeah, so Hometowns to Hollywood is the name of my blog, or essentially travel website. I started it back in 2013, again, stemming from this love of classic film. And essentially the sort of mission for the blog is documenting and celebrating how the legacies of some of these stars are still really discussed and remembered today. So with my blog, essentially, it documents my trips to the hometowns of these different classic film stars, and really is in pursuit of sort of those early days in their career, and the sites that were the genesis of their creativity, and looking at how these individuals are remembered in their hometowns and certainly beyond that. And they're celebrated in a number of different ways, whether it might be perhaps a museum standing in the individual's honor, or maybe there's a childhood home or a home they grew up in that still exists, or something like more modern, like maybe there's a statue in their honor, or a plaque, or something that celebrates a philanthropic effort to which they contributed that maybe still continues on, or in some cases there are full film festivals in honor of these people. So granted, some are remembered more than others, some are remembered better than others, I think, too, in terms of their legacies, but that's really the goal of the blog, is really documenting those different sites and how these individuals are celebrated.
Is it a point where you find their old home, or the home where they grow up? Do you go up there and knock on the door and see if the relatives are still there, or what do you do when you actually get to the home?
You know, I've never knocked on someone's door. Usually when I do one of those visits, I'll visit like the front of the home, because in many cases, if the home is still around, it's a private residence typically. But if the owners are receptive, I do typically try to contact them in advance of my visit and see if I can maybe like arrange a tour if they're interested in the legacy, or if they're willing to share it. That's totally up to them, really. But yeah, I've been lucky to get inside some of these early homes. I think one of my favorites was Carol Lombard's home, actually. She was from Fort Wayne, Indiana. So that's where she spent the early years of her life. She wasn't there very long, but I was able to connect with the owner. At the time, it was running partially as a bed and breakfast. So they were clearly open to the public being there. They were very aware of the legacy. In fact, they bought the home because of the legacy, and celebrate Carol really throughout the home. There's a plaque in front of the home, and it's a special feeling to walk in someone's footsteps from that era, I think. So, you know, walking up and down the same staircase that she did, seeing where her girlhood room was when she was a child. So things like that, I think, really do intrigue me.
One section of the website I do like is recipes. So I think there was some one with the Three Stooges. What is the whole recipe section about?
Yeah, so interestingly, part of keeping these individuals' name out there in the public and with the different people who are in charge of publicity for these stars, their jobs would be keeping these individuals' names in like fan magazines, trade magazines, etc., seeing like making sure again, essentially that their name was out there. And one way to get some of these individuals to appeal to the public was to sort of make them seem human and not just as movie stars. So we do occasionally in early film fan magazines encounter celebrity recipes. And again, you have to kind of take some of that with a grain of salt. Some of these stars actually did cook. Some of them I don't believe they ever cooked. But in some cases, there are individuals who have passed on like family recipes or talk about some of their beloved recipes. And some of those are available in fan magazines. So I think the first one I did was a recipe for Katharine Hepburn's brownies. I just encountered it in a random cookbook that I was looking through and saw the Hollywood connection and gave that a shot. And she's one who did cook. So it's interesting to see and I get a taste of her legacy quite literally in that situation.
There's also a section for you go to film festivals. Maybe those haven't been there, or what film festivals do you go to, and what goes on at a film festival?
Sure. Well, one of my favorites is the Turner Classic Movies Film Festival. I was lucky to do some freelance writing for Turner Classic Movies and appear on the air a few times. And naturally, one of my dreams was to get to the film festival. So I was truly lucky to really immerse myself in almost a week-long festival where essentially you kind of walk around up and down Hollywood Boulevard and participate in viewing different films. There's a set schedule. There's multiple film viewings across different theatrical venues, and you essentially kind of get your pick to enjoy films. And there are special aspects to it in the form of maybe guest stars. Sometimes the descendants of some of these stars are present at festivals and they do a film introduction. Certainly there's panels. Something exciting for me is usually seeing film restorations. So seeing a film that had maybe like a really just not so great print finally get that star treatment and get re-released. And the ever elusive nitrate screening. We have notoriously dangerous to preserve nitrate film stock, which is infamously known for being able to combust. So not a lot of nitrate prints survive, and certainly where we're lucky to have any of those that exist. And so some of the, at least one venue will typically do some sort of a big nitrate film screening too.
With you freelancing for TCM, did you ever get to meet Ben Mankiewicz?
Yes, I have met Ben a few times and some of the other hosts. Sadly, I was not around to meet and speak with Robert Osborne. I did get to run into him when he was in Chicago one year, but alas, not in that capacity.
Well, there's a great event coming up at the Patio Theater of the Nosferatu screening. It's the 100th anniversary. And like you said, talk about films that stand the test of time for 100 years. And I believe the backstory was it almost got destroyed. Maybe you want to talk, I believe you're going to be there and give a speech or a presentation if you want to just highlight why was Nosferatu or is such a great film.
Sure, yeah. So I will be introducing the film at the Patio Theater in Chicago. And this is actually part of a larger event through the Silent Film Society of Chicago. I was lucky to connect with them, and they have an organist, Jay Warren, who does live organ accompaniment if the theater has an organ. Otherwise, he travels and provides musical accompaniment with his electronic setup, just in step with what's being shown on the screen, just like it were actually being screened in the 1920s. So it's a really fun element to see that film be seen in the way it was intended to be seen, with that live musical accompaniment, with that communal movie-going experience. And I think it's special to be able to be part of seeing and hearing audience members react to what's going on the screen. And with Nosferatu, yeah, it's definitely a special film. It turns 100 among other things. So this is one of those cases where it's been sort of a century of having the legacy of this film. It's one of the earliest horror films. So if you are a horror fan, it's always interesting, I think, to see sort of the origins of these different genres and how things have changed from 100 years ago to what we see as horror today. It's a German expressionist film, so stylistically, it's very intriguing to see. And truly, I think their whole depiction of this Nosferatu character is really fascinating. It's more of a film where it's what you don't see on screen that is what makes the film sort of spooky and haunting in a way. We do have that Nosferatu character. He plays a character named Count Orlok. He's not really Count Dracula due to legal reasons. Like technically, this is Bram Stoker's Dracula, but it's unauthorized. It's totally unapproved. So they tried to kind of skirt around that by changing character names, and hence we have Nosferatu as Count Orlok. But he himself only gets about 9 minutes of screen time. So you'd think you'd see him a lot more than you do in the film, but when you do, it's that much more eerie since he's sort of this elusive figure. Like we'll see his shadow at moments. We'll know he's around without seeing him since characters will refer to him. So coming up this Saturday, March 5th, yes, gosh, at the Patio Theater in Chicago.
Moving up a few years, is why do a lot of historians consider 1939 to be the classic year for Hollywood movies?
Yeah, that is something hotly debated, but many film historians do agree that it is 1939. But I think it's really the caliber of films and performances that were being released that year. So just to name a few, and these are all still big name films, I think to this day, still pretty heavily discussed. The Wizard of Oz, for one, came out in 1939. Another big film based on a book, Gone with the Wind, also came out that year. We also had big films like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, Stagecoach, Wuthering Heights, among many, many more films too, that really stemmed from that year. And I think that was especially, I think, a notable year for filmmaking too, when it came around to the Oscar ceremony. We had all these big performers who were in top-notch lead roles and in great, highly anticipated films, all of a sudden, like really, really competing for these roles. And, you know, initially with the Academy Awards, people knew full well if they were getting an award or not. But by 1939, it was more suspenseful. People didn't find out until at the ceremony. So I think part of it, like, it was to also get the public involved and really anticipating the awards in that season too. So 1939, yeah, essentially for the scale of the different releases and really the caliber of the on and off screen talents, especially that year.
With the Oscars this year and previous years, it seems like they're trying to reinvent themselves. Maybe you can touch on that. Is it because of ratings? Is that because they want to just try something different? I know with hosts and non-hosts. And what's your take on the Oscars of today?
There has been a lot of, I think, attempts at reinvention. And I think a huge part of sort of what touched the industry too is unfortunately the pandemic. You might remember the ceremony from last year where it was held, but socially distanced and limited. We've also gone hostless for a few years too. Some people like that. Some people really miss that. I think I frankly enjoy looking at old YouTube Oscar hosts like the Bob Hope years and seeing just someone really be the master of ceremonies time and time again. And I'm a child of the 90s, so I remember Billy Crystal. And for me, it was nice to see that familiar face, to have some comedy peppered in as well. But yeah, I think right now, a big issue too is representation. So the Academy wanting to see people of various races, having both men and women highly represented in the ceremony too. So if things come to fruition, I believe our host this year will be women. So it'll be nice to, I think, see that explored. I believe it's three women who are going to be hosting this ceremony. So we have this trifecta of hosts after, I think, if I'm not mistaken, 3 years without one at this point.
Well, I'll throw you a question that you probably get asked all the time.
Okay.
What's one of your favorite movies?
Oh my goodness, yes. It changes all the time. I think it's a tough question to nail down. But for me, I think the film that really made me into the classic film fan I am today is The Wizard of Oz from 1939. I think I grew up really looking forward to those annual broadcasts, watching those with my family. And one day, I mean, over the years, when I was about 9 years old, my family got cable TV, and I remember just surfing through the different channels and stumbling across TCM. And one of the films that was shown at that point was a film called Strike Up the Band with Judy Garland and Mickey Rooney. And it just baffled my 9-year-old brain that she had done something besides play Dorothy. So I felt like I stumbled across a treasure trove of Judy Garland's filmography. I went to my local library and checked out as many of her movies as I could. And really through watching her films, it exposed me to the other greats that she worked with, like, you know, Fred Astaire, Gene Kelly, etc. And I sort of went down the classic film rabbit hole there. But today there's so much I enjoy, really in terms of genres. I love musicals and comedies. I adore Billy Wilder's Some Like It Hot, probably another one of my all-time favorite films. So certainly no shortage on my end.
So let's say you're at Purdue University and you go in the physics department, they have a time machine, you'll go into it. What year would you go and which star would you talk to?
Wow, that's difficult. Oh man. That's a great question. My goodness. Well, I think one of my idols would be Judy Garland, so I think I'd love to talk to her, probably around her years making The Wizard of Oz, because I think that's a period that fascinates many historians. Number one, because it's 1939, but also to talk to someone who was front and center in the making of one of those films is fascinating.
Well, let's talk about the your website, how people can, or is there any other events that are coming up besides the Nosferatu that you want to promote too? Because once again, your presentations are just top notch.
Thank you so much. So my website does continue to be actively maintained. I'm back to traveling, thankfully. Thankfully I'll keep that up and exploring these different celebrity hometowns. So feel free to look at my website, hometowns2hollywood.com, and look for some of your favorite stars there. I have profiles of over 150, I think, stars domestically and internationally from that era. So you could look into them. I also do have a book out, Hometowns to Hollywood Volume 1, which is available on Amazon. Hopefully it's volume 1 of many more to come. And I'm also on Facebook too. I have a Facebook page, Hometowns to Hollywood LLC. So you could feel free to follow me there as well. In terms of some of my other events, I have quite a bit of them. Actually, this March is the busiest month ever in terms of presentations for my work with Hometowns to Hollywood. I have 21 presentations coming up this month, but sort of grouping them together, it's Women's History Month. So I have a program called The Women Who Built Hollywood, which delves into the lives and legacies of women who were influential in filmmaking. Several iterations of that. We talked about Oscar season as well. I have quite a few Oscar programs coming up, to ones that highlight Academy Award history. I have another one that highlights Best Picture history, as well as one that highlights Best Actresses. And with each one of those, I'll also talk about some of the modern contenders for Best Picture, Best Actress, etc. So yeah, quite a bit going on in March. But yeah, I encourage you to visit my website. There's an events tab, and you can just read through the whole list. The vast majority of these events are free to attend. For the most part, still virtual via Zoom. Handful are still in person, like the patio event.
And the website address?
Hometowns2hollywood.com.
Well, Annette, thank you so much for talking with us today. You get through, once again, great research and great presentation that you do. And thank you so much for talking with us today.
Thank you so much.